Como a la 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 de la mañana, el sol calienta ranchos anchos y de luz todos los baña. Ya esos campos van los niños campesinos, sin destino, son peregrinos de verdad. Van de camino los veranos, inviernos y primaveras, cruzando estados y condados y ciudades.
Good afternoon, Santa Cruz, Monterey Bay, and online listeners. It's every other Sunday again, and day 62 of the Great Hunkering Down. Welcome to Sustainability Now, a bi-weekly program focused on environment and social justice in the Monterey Bay region, California, and the world. I'm your host, Ronnie Lipschitz. My guest today is Dr. Ann Lopez, founder and executive director of the Center for Farmworker Families in Watsonville, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the living and working conditions of migrant farm worker families on the Central Coast and in Mexico. She's an emerita professor at San Jose City College and has taught courses in biology, environmental science, ecology, and botany in the biology department. She's author of The Farm Worker's Journey, about the human side of the binational migration circuit from the subsistence and small producer farms of West Central Mexico to employment in California's corporate agribusiness. In 2019, Ann was chosen as Woman of the Year by the 29th Assembly District of California. In March 2018, she was selected for a 16th annual Cesar E. Chavez Community Award in Watsonville. So thank you, Ann, for joining me on Sustainability Now.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So why don't we get started? Why don't you start by telling us what the Center for Farmworker Families does, how it came to be?
Well, it came to be as a result of my doing an 8-year-long PhD at UC Santa Cruz, in which I studied the binational impact of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And out of that, I learned that families on both sides of the border are in inordinate pain and suffering. I had no idea. I knew things were bad, but I had no idea the level of pain people were in. And the fact that they were being run off their farms by our introduction of genetically modified and hybrid corn strains into Mexico, which undercut the price that they used to get for part of their corn crop. So what it created was this mass exodus out of the countryside, literally millions of farmers leaving their farms, their families, homes, villages, etc., to come to the United States or to go to a large city in Mexico or anything to find work. And so the bulk of the undocumented population that of farm workers that we have in the state today are the result of that exodus. And at the end of my dissertation, I sat in my office and did a lot of soul searching. I had planned, I had thought about going into a university and continuing the research and teaching, but I kept reminding myself of the dehumanization that this massive exodus of farmers from the countryside created. And I just felt like I had to do something about it. And I remember thinking to myself, if the American public knew what I know, they would not tolerate this. And so out of that, we developed this Center for Farmworker Families as a 501c3 to educate the public primarily about these circumstances that farm workers find themselves in, and their family, also their family members in Mexico. And we also do what we can to promote well-being within the populations of farm workers, including we have projects in Mexico, in California, We also work legislatively with legislators that think like we do and feel that there ought to be some changes to the existing laws that actually would support farm workers. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Well, what is your background? I mean, you taught for many years at San Jose City College and then went back to get your PhD at UC Santa Cruz, right? How did all of that happen?
Excuse me. Well, I did my master's at UC Santa Barbara.
And
yeah.
Mute your the Zoom, okay?
Mute the Zoom.
Turn off the microphone. Sorry, folks. We're watching each other while we're having this conversation.
Oh, mute. I see it. Okay. All right.
Go on. Sorry
Got
to
it.
interrupt you.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's better.
Great. Okay. So anyway, I met Steve Gleesman as a grad student at UC Santa Barbara, and when I came to Northern California to teach biology at San Jose City College, I used to take my classes over to the farm on the campus so they could see what an agroecological farming process was like. And Steve would constantly and relentlessly remind me that I should do a PhD, and I wasn't interested at the time. But then they opened up a new environmental studies program in '94, and I had just developed the environmental science program at San Jose City. And so Steve invited me to that, and that was appealing, and that's where I got into the program and how I got going. So I have 2 degrees in biology and 1 in environmental studies.
And the book was your dissertation, right?
Right. That was done in a postdoc.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I
I suspect, I don't know about our listeners, but I suspect much of the American public can't distinguish amongst migrants from Mexico. And I know that a lot of the farm workers in California are not Spanish speakers. Can you tell us a little bit about where they come from?
Well, there's a whole huge population of Oaxacan farm workers in Central California, Central Coastal California, and they speak Zapotec and Mixtec primarily. Further south, we have Triqui in Greenfield, but most of the farm workers I interact with can speak some Spanish, or they have family members that can translate. Mm-hmm. I've only met a few, just a handful of farm workers that have no ability in Spanish, so one of the 2 languages at least.
But these are what we would call indigenous to Mexico, right? And not descendants from European settlers.
Definitely
right?
not.
Yeah. So when they come here, who do they work for? Is it small farms or big farms, or who hires them? How do they go ahead.
They go from farm to farm and looking for work, and apparently they ask the farmers for work, and the farmer's first question is, do you know how to pick strawberries? Because that's the most common crop we have in the area. And if they haven't learned how to pick strawberries, then they're pretty much out of luck. However, there are some growers who, with a time commitment, will hire them. So they'll have to stay there 5 years after they learn, for instance.
When you say they have to stay there 5 years, how does the grower keep them?
Well, I mean, that's just the agreement they make. I suppose they could run off, but then there's always hanging over their head the fear of deportation or being blackballed. And that is a huge fear. They live with that constantly.
So the farmers, the growers actually let each other know who is reliable and who isn't? Is there sort of a list?
who has committed a transgression or whatever.
Huh.
Yeah, and enough farm workers seem to have had that kind of experience that the word has gotten around.
And what, just to clarify then for people who are listening, when they're picking strawberries, how do they get paid? Piecework or hourly, or what's the arrangement?
Well, it really depends. If there's a large crop, they usually pay them by piecework, so that as the more baskets they fill in a given period of time, the more money they make. So that, and then sometimes if the crop is slow, they'll pay them by the hour, and sometimes some of both. $4.50 an hour and 70 cents a case of 12 baskets, for instance. Whatever it is, it's much too low.
I mean, I assume minimum wage laws don't apply in this instance. No. What I always think about, of course, is grapes of wrath and the crop migration cycle. Does that still happen?
I don't see that, and I think part of it is because all the farm workers I've worked with want their kids educated and out of farm work. So they don't want to be migrating. They want to be stationary in one school district in a community so their kids can learn and move beyond farm work.
That must get fairly difficult during the seasons where there's nothing to pick.
Oh, it's terrible. In the winter, literally, excuse me, literally they starve. I've gone to homes or apartments where people have no food in the house.
Yeah, I was reading this morning that you were operating a food bank for farm workers. Are you still doing that?
Yeah, we have a distribution now once a month where we are partnered with Second Harvest Food Bank, and we supply household goods and food for however many families show up, and usually it's around 100 to 200 families. And then in December, we must have had 600. I mean, there was just masses of people coming.
How many? I mean, what's the number of farm workers or families in the Central Coast? Do you have any idea?
I don't, but I can tell you this: that in this one location we have the distributions. It's like a long street, and I remember standing at one end of the street and seeing people as far as I could see till the next block, and wondering where these people live. Because you never see them out on the street. They don't leave where they live unless they're in the field or buying food. They're too afraid. It's very sad.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because where do they live? I found this article. I think you're quoted in it somewhere, but. It says here, during the growing season, 90,000 farm workers. And I was wondering, first of all, do growers provide housing anymore, or are they basically thrown on the open market to find a place?
Yep, that's it. Now, we did get AB 1783, Robert Revis's bill, that will allow, or actually the state now, will supply funds for farm worker housing on surplus agricultural land. But now with COVID, that's all stopped. So,
what's surplus agricultural land?
It's a good question. I guess it's land that's not being used, but I think some growers have some land on their property that is not planted, in which case they can build housing for farm workers.
Let's say we need to take a brief break, okay? You're listening to KSQD 90.7 FM in Santa Cruz and ksqd.org on the internet. Emily?
Thanks, Ronnie. Because of beach crowds that undermine shelter in place, Santa Cruz County is now limiting beach activity during peak hours. Beaches are now closed to the public from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. At other times, beaches remain available only for recreational activities to promote physical and mental health. Walking on the beach alone or with a family member is allowed. Activities such as lying, sitting, standing, sunbathing, sightseeing, and other non-exercise related activities remain restricted. No umbrellas, barbecues, coolers, beach chairs, shade structures, tents, or other equipment will be allowed at any time. Water-based activities such as surfing, swimming, paddleboarding, and kayaking are allowed at all times. Beaches may be traversed to participate in these activities. Additionally, facilities adjacent to beaches such as parkways, sidewalks, and trails will remain open. For more information, visit www.santacruzhealth.org/coronavirus. Residents may also call 831-454-4242 between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. daily. Back to you, Ronnie.
Okay, thanks, Emily. You're listening to Sustainability Now on KSQD. My guest today is Dr. Ann Lopez, the founder and executive director of Center for Farmworker Families. We were talking about the housing problem that farm workers have in the Central Coast area. Can you tell us a little bit about, the conditions?
It's terrible. It's just disgraceful. It's one of the issues that I am most frustrated about. Imagine a situation where you have about 1,000 square feet of an apartment. You've got 18 people and children living in it, one bathroom, and people line up in the morning to go to the bathroom. That's the kind of housing that's available. And the housing is so expensive, everybody in the household pitches in, and that's how they make it. But in this coronavirus pandemic we're in, it's very dangerous because there is no social distancing. If someone gets sick, everybody gets sick. So it's really a time bomb waiting to happen. I'm very concerned about it.
Have you seen any statistics or indication amongst farm workers?
No, and I have feelers out all through the community. I tell them, if you hear of anybody, call me. And so far, we've been very lucky. And I think that Robert Rivas's new bill, the AB 2043, will help with that as well, because that mandates that the growers and there has to be outreach to inform the growers and the employees in any farm how to protect themselves from COVID in terms of distancing, sanitation, hand washing, all of it.
Yes, I mean, I was looking, you pointed out, I was looking at the bill, and is this just basically information? Is there anything more than just, informing growers and whoever is listening?
Well, it's outreach, but it's supposed to direct. Let's see. I have here the that it has to. It involves Cal OSHA and their standards board, and they have to require that the employers do this, and the employees become informed. Most of them already are. We've done our own education campaign, but I'm sure there's a lot that haven't. So I think the idea of having outreach in every farm, employing these standards is really critical to that population.
Are growers providing any kind of equipment, any kind of PPE? Personal protective equipment is...
I haven't heard of any. However, we are, and the public is. The public has given me literally hundreds of masks, and we've been passing them out at all the distributions.
Mm-hmm. But there's, looking again at the bill, there's no sanctions for not doing this, is there? It's just basically... I'm looking at the text, and I don't see anything about what happens if growers don't do anything.
Don't do this. Exactly. Yeah, it's very, at least it's, the way I look at it, at least there's something. I just think the neglect of farm workers has been, this is just kind of another example of neglect of farm workers. Rick Mines up at UC Davis says that the longer they're in California, the sicker they get. And this is just a reflection of it. They are just, bodies that are there for exploiting and providing a $50 billion food industry, and there's really not a whole lot of legalities that protect them. I have heard of cases where farm workers die. They're never in the obituaries. They just disappear, and it's like they're discardable human beings. And I really think, especially in a community like Santa Cruz, that there needs to be reform on all levels for farm workers.
What would that look like?
Well, I have, in my wildest fantasies, I have imagined transforming the entire state's agriculture into an agroecological system that is dependent basically on working with nature instead of poisoning nature with pesticides and et cetera, and having smaller farms that are run by farm worker cooperatives. That would be my ideal vision. But beyond that, I think there should be minimum wage. I think there should be minimum hours. Right now, one farm worker told me that she goes into work at 7 and gets off at 10, 5 days a week. And I said, well, why don't they just have you work one whole day and then you can go somewhere else and work, because they don't want to lose us. So it's like that. Yeah.
This is 10 in the morning, not 10 at night.
Correct.
Oh, so half a day, and then
three hours a day.
Wow.
And so if you're making $11 an hour, how do you pay rent, at the end of the day with that kind of money? That's why they live on the edge of survival. And I think that people that are this essential, that is critical to the nation and the state's health, I think really ought to be treated with a little more dignity.
Absolutely. Well, that kind of, you mentioned essential. So the Trump administration has defined migrant farm workers as essential workers.
Isn't
I was
that
wondering,
amazing?
I'm wondering what exactly that means, because it's based on visas, right? And many of the farm workers don't have those.
I see
right?
what you're saying. Well, the definition I have is that when the work is crucial to the health of the state and the nation, those are the individuals that are deemed essential workers. However, to come out of the Trump administration after calling them rapists and murderers, that's quite a jump, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. But, I mean, my understanding is that the Trump administration is somehow, that's somehow this is a program with visas. It's kind of like the old Bracero program. And that's how they're defining essential workers, right? Which, of course, leaves everybody who is here and undocumented in this kind of a limbo.
Yeah.
That's my impression, and it is kind of sort of strange that at the same time they're building the wall, of course.
Yeah, of course. With our tax money, by the way, they have this bill out that's bipartisan. It's supported by the UFW. It's H.R. 5038. Have you heard of this one?
No, that's in Congress then, right? That's Washington.
HR. Yeah. And I think it's in committee because things have pretty much shut down since the COVID thing started. But basically there used to be, Zolofgren introduced one, H.R. 641. Any farm worker that put 100 hours into the field got a blue card and couldn't be deported. Hurrah. I could really support that. Then, after that, this H.R. 5038 came out, And this makes it much harder to get any kind of legal residency. And the worst part of it is the second part, which expands the H-2A visa program. And the Southern Poverty Law Center has a whole study on the H-2A program, which they call close to slavery. We don't need slavery. We have enough of that in this state. So I am very opposed to that one.
So, I mean, is the H-2A program then the visa program that I was just talking about?
Yeah.
And is this one of those arrangements whereby a certain chunk of funds are sequestered? What's the word? They're garnished and put in an account and only payable when the individual goes home back to Mexico? Is it that kind of arrangement?
Well, I think it varies with the grower what they want to do, but basically the farm workers are their personal property while they're here in this country. And so if the grower is abusive, if he's cruel, if he doesn't pay or whatever, he can just threaten them and send them back. I mean, they have no free agency, no rights to go to another employer.
Yeah.
So, and then the third part, if you're interested, the third part is verify that all farm workers have to be e-verified with the grower. But that's not going to work, because if people come across the border and a farmer has crops to be picked, he'll hire them. He or she will hire them. They're not going to worry about e-verify. So I think it's a bad bill. I hope it doesn't pass.
Yeah, well, that's one of the contradictions of the system, right? Which is especially the Republican Party, which on the one hand wants to be very tough on migration, right? And on the other hand, a significant chunk of its constituency are farmers, many of whom rely on low-cost migrant labor.
We should treat these people like they're gods, to be doing the work they're doing, breaking their backs, dying at an average life expectancy of 49 years, living in abject poverty, and providing us with food. We should be thankful that they're here. Who wants to do that work?
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, people are not, citizens are not rushing to do it, and I wonder if someone showed up, if a U.S. citizen actually showed up, in a labor pool, whether they would be hired.
Yeah, well, they have been. I hear about it in Watsonville. Most of them don't make it till noon.
Yeah, well, I certainly wouldn't.
The first day.
Yeah. What is the 50-mile rule?
The 50-mile rule, well, first of all, I have to say I have somewhat of a cynical attitude about the state's role in the treatment of farm workers, in the sense that everything possible seems to be done to keep their children from becoming educated and keeping them in farm work even for the next generations. And the 50-mile rule was a classic for that. It basically says at the end of the season in the 24 states migrant camps that a family has to move at least 50 miles away and establish residence and prove it if they want to move back to the same unit that they left at the Buena Vista migrant camp here in Watsonville. So their kids end up going to at least 2 schools, and they fall further and further behind. And literally in 20 years of knowing the same farm worker families in that camp, I did not hear of a single graduation of anybody from high school except the ones that didn't go the 50 miles. They had relatives in Watsonville and they could live with them or whatever. But it's set up so that they can't continue education.
Here, let's take a quick break right now, okay? You're listening to KSQD 90.7 FM in Santa Cruz and ksqd.org on the internet. And over to you, Emily.
Escape the noise. Take a break from the chaos.
Tune in to KSQD Santa Cruz 90.7 FM and follow the path of the squid. Eclectic music, news that matters, and stories that inspire and inform. The squid knows the way. KSQD Santa Cruz 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station.
Back to you, Ronnie.
Yeah, that's K-Squid, your ink spot on the dial. This is Ronnie Lipschutz. You're listening to Sustainability Now. I'm speaking with Dr. Ann Lopez, founder and executive director of the Center for Farmworker Families in Watsonville. We were just talking about the 50-mile rule, which requires families to move after the end of the season of the season for a particular crop, 50 miles away. Is this a state law or is this a federal law?
It was, yeah. It's no longer in existence.
Oh, it's no longer in existence. Okay.
No, we worked 8 years to get rid of that. I testified personally on 7 different occasions in Sacramento, but I think the deciding factor, and one that taught me a lot, was that I went to our current lieutenant governor's presentation before her election, Eleni Kounalakis, and she asked me afterwards what I do. I told her. She asked if she could go to the migrant camp and meet migrants. I said, sure. So I took her to the most vocal of the people who are against the 50-mile regulation. And she was so disturbed by the whole thing that she called the lieutenant governor right from the person's unit. And then she wrote me a note and said that she had emailed Governor Brown, and he put it on a trailer of some bill, and it was gone. So we don't have that. But what we do have now is no internet. No internet, so the children in the migrant camp that just moved back cannot do their assignments.
Is this a technical? This is not a political.
I hope
problem.
not.
It's access, right? It's No, I was just, I could imagine there being some sort of law denying wiring of camps, but of course.
But 20 years ago, when I first started working in the camp, they not only had internet, they had computer classes. And farm workers at the end of the day could come and learn how to use computers and the internet.
So what has changed?
That's a good question. I have to look into it. Yeah. But I get suspicious. I have to say, I confess.
Especially if it was once available.
Yeah.
Let's turn to environmental effects and injustices. I know that's a big area, and I've heard you speak about it before. But maybe you can tell us something about that. What are the environmental conditions under which migrant workers work?
Well, they're exposed to horrific pesticides. Fortunately, we got rid of one, chlorpyrifos. We worked for years to do that. Chlorpyrifos is a brain-damaging insecticide, and if a woman is pregnant in the fields and exposed to this, her fetus is at risk of having ADHD, lowered IQ, autism, and I personally have been to families where there's at least one and sometimes multiple children with these disorders. And farm workers are the least able to afford to take care adequately of children that are in this kind of special condition. So that's I think that's the biggest one.
What's the situation with fumigants for strawberries? I haven't been following that lately.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of use of organophosphate pesticides, and the Chamacos, UC Berkeley did a study and found that mothers who are exposed within 1 kilometer of a certain amount of organophosphates their fetus, once it's born and reaches age 7, will have lost 1 or 2 points of IQ, and then they go to schools, and a lot of these organophosphates are volatile. They move through the air, so they can move through the air into the classroom and further damage the brain. So, I mean, this kind of thing I think is really has a racist component, because I don't think that this would ever be tolerated in white neighborhoods.
Does the pesticides also affect adults, or in what ways?
Well, I would say less, but it just depends on the pesticide, really. I mean, for instance, Roundup is used extensively as an herbicide, and it causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. You've probably heard of the court cases involving non-Hodgkin's. So that one, and then I understand now that there's been so much uproar against Roundup that now there's a new herbicide coming out that's even worse. So I think what we need to do is stop the use of these chemicals. We don't need the chemicals. There's 2 excellent studies that shows that if we converted all agriculture worldwide to organic overnight, we could feed the entire world's population. Why aren't we doing that? It doesn't make sense.
Well, we could get into a whole discussion of big agriculture and property and the like, right? To account for that, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure we want to go down that particular rabbit trail. You mentioned earlier that I think the median lifetime of life expectancy of a farm worker is 49. So
49.
Is that because of exposure to pesticides, or just where? I mean, what's the cause? Why? Or is it lack of access to medical medical care?
All of that. It's just like I was mentioning Professor Rick Mines. He was saying they'd be better off if they stayed in Mexico. He says a life of crowded living conditions, exposure to pesticides, poor diet, no medical insurance, all of these things add up and eventually take their toll. It's the kids are addicted to sugar by the time they're about 2 or 3 years old. It's very sad, because that's what's affordable, is carbohydrates and sugar. And if you go in the stores in Watsonville, they're all set up with the sugary stuff, and it's tragic. I think it's just that there's not the respect.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about the center, okay, for a little while, all right?
Sure.
Can you talk about some of the projects that you're running?
Well, I want people to hear the stories I've been hearing now for over 20 years. So we set up Farmworker reality tours, where we bring groups in the public together with farm workers who will tell their story. And and once people become informed, then they become more active. They have a better picture of what the conditions are for farm workers. So the farm worker reality tours are very important, because then people have face-to-face, first-hand experience with farm workers, and they're no longer this invisible, amorphous mass that picks our food. That's one. Then we do distributions of food and household goods once a month in a secret location, so that all the undocumented farm workers feel free to come and get what they need, essentially. And that has really stopped a lot of the hunger in the community, I have to say. So those are two of, and it's very ironic to me that we have to hide to give them food while they are out in the fields providing food for us. What is wrong with this picture?
Are you still doing? Are you still do? I know saw there's a reality tour scheduled in June. Are you planning to do that, or does that just depend
can't.
on? You can't do that.
Unless they drop the restrictions, we can't. Yeah. We had several scheduled, but we haven't been able to do them.
Yeah. What about projects in Mexico? Are you still doing those?
Yes, we are. We work in the high mountains of Jalisco and also in Oaxaca. And we provide clothing in Oaxaca for the remote villagers who just don't have, they're just totally, some of the poorest people I've ever been around. So we get them clothes. And then in the high mountains of Jalisco, they're a little bit, the villagers are a little bit better off, but they still are in poverty. And we typically go out and have a piñata party. We take fruit, we take a cake, and we find out what the needs are. And we have supplied shoes for several different villages, for everybody in the village. One winter, we supplied coats for everybody. So it's a matter of going out and being introduced into the culture and then talking to people and finding out what the needs are and then trying to fulfill them. That's what we do there.
And anything else at the moment? Any other projects at the moment? I'm just curious.
On either side or in Mexico?
Well, here in Mexico, are you doing tutoring?
Yes, I was going to bring that up. We were doing tutoring before COVID, but we hope to get the program back so that any farm worker children who need assistance with assignments or tutoring for classes will find somebody, a volunteer, who would like to help in that way, and they get to know a family really well and their children, and it's a very enriching experience. Yeah.
I lost my next question. Well, are you if and when we're allowed back out into the world, what sort of can volunteers come and work with with you? Well, what sort of things can they do?
Well, they can volunteer to tutor, one. Number two, they can come to our distributions and help us pass out this mass of goods that we have to provide for farm workers, and that allows them also to get to know farm workers and families. So that's another one. We have Christmas parties. They can volunteer to help us with those. We also have Easter parties, and then sometimes we don't have enough goods for all of the children to get gifts. So we do a fund drive, and then we need people to go out and shop and buy the presents and wrap them for the children that did not come to the party. So that's another activity we have. And then, of course, I speak to whoever will listen, because I want this to change. I think the only way to have it change is if people become informed.
Do you when you do these speaking gigs, do you ever bring along farm workers to talk?
Yep. Yeah, we do. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that they hear those voices, and then I translate. In fact, I think I sent you a link to one translation of an undocumented farm worker and her story crossing the desert. Yeah. Right.
Well, I'll link that on the when I post the show to the archive. I will put that link on there.
Great.
So people can look at that.
That's great. And you can go on our website and get all kinds of information too. We're at farmworkerfamily.org.
All right. Let's take a break for a moment. Okay. This is K-Squid, 90.7 FM, your ink spot on the radio dial, and ksquid.org on the internet. Over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Ronnie. So tune in next Sunday, May 24th at 5 p.m. for a special episode of Be Bold America, Stealing Our Democracy with Governor Don Siegelman. Known as America's political prisoner number one, former Alabama Governor Don Siegelman served 5 years for something that wasn't a crime. Governor Siegelman's case was the subject of a CBS 60 Minutes report and a full-length documentary titled Atticus and the Architect. He was a victim of the Alabama Republican political machine and Karl Rove. 100 state attorneys general, both Democrat and Republican, tried to get Siegelman out of prison, to no avail. Hear about his life in federal prison, his abandonment by the Democratic Party, and his new mission to create substantive changes in the criminal justice system on Be Bold America. That's next Sunday, May 24th at 5 p.m. on Be Bold America, KSQD 90.7 FM, your ink spot on the dial, or you can listen online at ksqd.org. Back to you, Ronnie.
All right. This is Ronnie Lipschutz. You're listening to Sustainability Now. My guest today is Dr. Ann Lopez, the founder and executive director of Center for Farmworker Families. And, let's broaden this a little bit and talk a bit more about political economy, the political economy of agriculture. I know that's something that you're very passionate about. And you mentioned the impacts of NAFTA on corn raising in Mexico, and that was also accompanied by an amendment to the Mexican Constitution breaking up the ejidos, right? The collective farms. Well, supposedly we have a new one, right? A new NAFTA. I mean, Donald Trump, he was trumpeting, this agreement. And what does that, how does that affect agriculture in Mexico and here? Do you know?
Well, I can tell you that it's too late for the agriculture in Mexico because what happened was after NAFTA took away the tariffs at the border, then our GMO corn and hybrid corn flowed by the ton load into Mexico, and it was planted right next to the traditional strains. And of course, corn pollen can fly 40 feet. So they're all contaminated now. There's very few. I mean, there are some in seed banks, and they're trying to bring it back. This new president, AMLO, is trying to bring back a lot of the traditional corn strains. But it's been a genetic disaster, basically. And so you can't come up with a new NAFTA and pull those genes out of the corn. And in the meantime, we're losing, or we've lost all those 9,000-year-old strains of corn. They're priceless.
What happened to the land, in the ejidos?
It was all privatized. People got title to their land, so rather than functioning as a community, you had your own individual plot of land, and most people either just left it to go to the U.S. and work or sold it. So there's been a concentration of farmland in many areas of Mexico with sales.
Who bought it?
Rich growers in Mexico.
I mean, Mexican, but in Mexico, not American corporations.
Well, some in some cases, yes, that are down there. Right.
I've read that strawberry growers are now growing strawberries in northern Mexico.
Right.
Right, and so we can have them all year round, right? But who's doing the work there? Do you know?
They are Mexican farm workers in Mexico that get paid almost nothing, and I won't mention any names, but I read an article that was so disturbing to me about how they sometimes send the military out to beat the farm workers.
Because what? To make them work harder, or
I guess so,
or just for the hell of it?
Well, who knows? But I mean, I was so distressed to read that, and it came from a very reliable source. But it's one of the U.S. companies that has subsidiaries in Mexico and is set up to grow strawberries, and this is what happened. And I just, it's like it speaks to what you were talking about no rights. Farm workers on either side of the border basically have no rights, partly because they're so impoverished. And it's interesting to me, too, even with the work that I've done with farm workers, how much they need an advocate because they can so easily be taken advantage of. One just case that comes to mind offhand was a farm worker whose daughter felt like she was being pursued by her elementary school teacher, and she wanted to be in a different class. And so her father went and requested this. They refused to put the kid in a different class. So I went with them, and when I introduced myself and told them who I was, that afternoon she was in a different class. But I mean, it's like they're not taken seriously and what their needs are.
Yeah, so it's more an issue of political power or lack of political power than it is.
They need a union. I think they need a union.
Yeah, the unions, they're not represented by, I mean, what was the farm workers union all about then?
Well, it was about legalized farm workers. And most of the ones we have here in the Central Coast are not they don't have papers. They should. I mean, we must do something to give them legal status. They deserve it. Some of them have been here 30 years, for God's sake.
I mean, I presume that they're sort of caught in a bind, right? Because they don't have papers, so they don't want to become visible in a union, right? But a union can't be formed without having workers sign up. Has anybody tried to organize the farm workers?
The Immokalee workers in Florida, many of them are undocumented. And then there's a group in Yakima, Washington, as well, that actually they were so upset with their conditions that they marched all the way from Yakima, Washington, down to Baja and stopped by UC Santa Cruz to give a talk. So and they have their own union. So I don't know. I talked to farm workers about this. Please, you need a union, and they're too afraid. It's just bottom line. Yeah, just like you were saying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, two last questions. We have a few more minutes. The first one is there anything that our listeners or that we can do for farm workers right now in the pandemic? With conditions in the pandemic,
I think everyone, even though it doesn't have as much teeth as we would like, I think everyone should call and support AB 2043 so that farm workers can become informed about health and safety standards in the field and reduce their chances of coming down with COVID-19. And I'm going to give you some people to call.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Ash Kalra is the chair of the Labor Committee.
How do you spell that?
Ash is ASH, and then Kalra is KALRA.
KALR. Oh, cholera. So it's not the disease. Okay.
No, not cholera.
It sounded like you were saying cholera.
No,
yeah. Okay. Cholera.
And the number is 916-319-2027.
Okay.
And then if you have questions, please call Assembly Member Robert Rivas' office, and he's at 916-319-2030.
So what's the status of 20 of the bill? Looking at it, I didn't see that it's actually been passed, has it?
No, it hasn't. I'm actually testifying Wednesday morning on behalf of this bill. So hopefully it'll... What?
Are you doing it remotely?
I know,
yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Can people tune into the hearings? Are these
I'm
public?
not sure. You could call Revis's office and ask. I'm not sure
Okay.
how that works, but it starts at 10.
You said
10
on Wednesday, huh?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And the other
And
thing,
what else?
The other thing is to donate to Center for Farmworker Families so we can provide rental assistance and food for farm workers. They're struggling terribly with both of those. And what we don't need is homeless farm workers on the streets of Watsonville.
Yeah.
So let's keep them in wherever they're living, crowded or otherwise, let's keep them sheltered at least.
And with food, you want donations, right, and not in kind, I suppose. I don't know what Second Harvest is. Second Harvest still helping you?
Yeah,
with this?
they are. They what they offer is limited in terms of the cuisine that, especially the Oaxacan farm workers are really like. They like black beans. They like flour. They make these white flour tortillas and rice. And sometimes they don't get that. So, we've had people donate bags from Costco of those items. So in kind is okay.
You'll also take that, and where would they bring them? To your office?
Well, you could, or we have 2 sheds in Watsonville that we keep stocked with items that farm workers need. And so they could call me, and I could give them instructions to the sheds. I'm at 831-335-5492.
Okay, all right. And I'll post that as well. Okay.
Great.
Is there anything else you want to tell us before we
Well,
before we
there's a
end
lot
our
of work to be done, but I'm very hopeful. I do believe there is a wave of public consciousness that is happening as a result of this COVID epidemic, which has been terrible for all of us, but the consciousness seems to be opening up in a way I have not seen in 20 years. So let's keep that wave moving.
Yeah, let's hope that it does.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Ann, I want to thank you so much for being on Sustainability Now. And, of course, I look forward to seeing you, when we get together, okay?
Absolutely, and thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So 2 weeks from today, my guest will be Rick Longanati, who is a member of the Campaign for Sustainable Transportation, which is described as a group of volunteers dedicated to making Santa Cruz County a place where everyone in our diverse community can access their needs and activities in a way that is safe, affordable, convenient, and sustainable for future generations. Of course, right now, if you go out on the roads, the traffic isn't too bad, but it's getting worse. We've noticed increases in traffic volumes on Highway 1, so people are going back to their old habits, and transportation and highway congestion are going to return. So it's going to be a hot topic, and I hope that we have a good conversation. So please join me on Sunday, May 31st from 5 to 6 p.m. right here on KSQD 90.7 FM or on your dial at ksquid.org. And as I've said, for those of you who can't resist getting up before the sun rises, not quite true anymore, the station rebroadcasts these Sunday shows on Tuesday mornings from 6 to 7 a.m. So early risers. And if you've missed program broadcasts, you can find the archived shows. Actually, if you go on sustainabilitysystemsfoundation.org and look for K-Squid shows, Sustainability Now, the link will take you to the archives, and they're being posted as well on K-Squid on the website, although these only remain, I think, online for a couple of weeks. And I want to thank Emily Donham, who is in the studio and taking care of all the engineering needs. And so until next every other Sunday, Sustainability Now.
Como a la 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 de la mañana, el sol calienta ranchos anchos y de luz todos los baña. Ya esos campos van los niños campesinos, sin destino, son peregrinos de verdad.
Different topics with Venerable Tenzin Choki.